is not identified, unlike painters and architects and sculptures. It's the diamond that is in the museum. I know Kohinoor diamond, but I don't know who cut it. See, the role of leadership is that you should not be in the limelight. Is the diamond that you shaped should be in the limelight. Now you take a diamond, which is an industrial product, one is agriculture, and you take a human being, polish that human being, mentor that human being, give the human being values, and the value of that human being goes from nothing to infinite. I'm one of them. As a refugee from Burma, I would have gone back to my small native place in Gujarat, as Atul mentioned. I would probably be a merchant of a single shop, earning about 4,000 rupees a month. That's like $100 a month. I'll be happy. It's not as if I won't be happy, because that's all I know. It's somebody else who saw my potential, both in the family, and some of the best ways to get potential out of people is dislocations. You have to survive, and if you have strong enough survival skill set or instinct, you can do anything afterwards. So my potential was got out by my sisters in the beginning, then by some school teachers. I moved to Chennai, totally different culture. It is almost like a Swede or a Swede living in Sicily, okay? I think our India is so diverse, more than the Europeans are. Interestingly, I had to learn English language. Because I learned English language, I could go abroad, and the rest is history. In fact, for speeches like this, if you want to take economic value, people like us charge $50,000 for 2 hours of speech all over the world. Now, just economic terms, see how much value add is created, and there's no upper limit. Interestingly, I think that's the ultimate passion. As a business leaders, if you can think about the job being making ordinary people extraordinary, and taking the satisfaction of how many of them did it, either through institution or through individual mentoring, whatever works, I think is very key. That's where the entrepreneurship comes. That's where, in fact, the self-confidence of people comes in a society, etc. So I'm very passionate about inclusive growth, and entrepreneurship are very doable, and we need to cast our mindset, whether it's a caste system mindset or a colonial mindset. Educated people have more stereotypes in their mind generally, I find. I'm an educator. I find more educated I get, the more stereotypes I have about other people in the world. So once we shed those stereotypes, you see the potential very much so. Realignment with China and India is absolutely necessary both ways, which means Malaysian companies must invest in those markets. Malaysian companies must access resources and become a strategic element into the whole ecosystem that is created. There's no way out, my view. And if Japanese can do it successfully, if Koreans can do it successfully, Malaysians can do even better job, my view. Keep that in the back of your mind. So I think that's the key one. Attract talent and capital, not just talent. And this is where probably Malaysia as a nation has not done as good a job in terms of really attracting talent and having them hub here. And I've done whole research about 8 countries as to who attracts talents, and when the talent becomes native, they forget they're immigrants, okay? Very fascinating countries. Of course, US comes out as high, but there are many other countries. So to me, there is just not enough change is necessary, and the locals generally would be not go for change. It's the status quo, they're comfortable. Best way to understand is cities that have been revitalized, it's always revitalized by people who came to that city from other places within the country, always. Civilizations have never been organized around countries, it has been always around cities. And sometimes the cities became expanding nations. Okay? So you have the Venice, for example. You have Rome, for example. You have, Athens, for example. It just goes on and on. Those are the cultural hotspots, something. So there's something, there's a whole process we can put together. The last point quickly is that as a nation, this whole notion of competitive advantage is fine, but the real thing we have to understand is what is our comparative advantage. I'm strongly an advocate of comparative advantage. This was created as a concept by an economist right after Adam Smith, David Ricardo. And he came out with a very radical thinking that British had gone from agriculture to the industrial society. Even if British can make bread cheaper than Spain, it is better actually to permanently exit the industry of making bread, even though you are a low-cost producer, give it to Spain, and then you actually make machines and you sell machines to Spain. Machines were more highly value-add than making bread. Only nation that has practiced this very well as a policy has been surprisingly England or UK. They embraced Ricardo's policy in the 1800s and outsourced two key industries, steel and textiles, both to America and India. Raw materials were there. Rather than bring the raw materials to UK, such as Birmingham, you might remember steel mills kind of stuff. They decided that they would rather do manufacturing in America, invested in the infrastructure, railroads and shipping and all the stuff they did, and that is how India got textile mills. India had no idea how to make textiles. Today, India is number 2 in textiles in the world, and China is number 1. And these two nations are becoming the 2 sourcing destinations, anything to do with textile, garments, etc., etc. Very fascinating. That theory is coming back now again. In other words, we should not look at our low-cost advantage, but what can we do with our resources that will command even higher value add, and you exit. So India has already exited voice call centers. It's not worth it. Tomorrow India will exit by market process a BPO, not sustainable. Indian talent in IT has to go for commanding $100 to $150 per hour wages as opposed to $35, $40, $50, you see, which comes in the R&D space, professional services like accounting, etc. You have to think like that. How do you move the nation? The only other nation that has done systematically through planning and policy has been Japan. Japan always creates 3 new industries and exits the other ones. The first was shipping industry after Japan, after the war, revitalization, steel, and shipbuilding, steel, and the third one I forget now. And they decided to get rid of that one, went into consumer electronics, automobile, and something. They are out of that now completely. It's very fascinating. They are into the next generation of where Japan would have a comparative advantage over other nations by and large, relative advantage. It's very interesting. I think we need to think as to what are the relative advantages of Malaysia. Is it natural resource? Is it geographical location? Whatever it is. And figure out from that viewpoint about what we need to select and focus as a nation. Because if you just take a domestic policy, then we end up doing everything without scale in anything, which is interesting. I mean, every nation has to be in agriculture sector, industrial sector, and services sector. That's fine, but which do you specialize in each one of them where you have a competitive advantage, which is a sustainable advantage over time? So I thought that this might be useful for a dialogue when we have a Q&A session, which is after lunch, I think, right? Pretty much, okay. So this is my view about the Malaysia Inc. Malaysia Inc. does not mean large Malaysian corporations. It includes small and medium enterprises, especially medium enterprises. Malaysian corporations, like all other nations, usually have a domestic mindset. My world is domestic. I know the rules, regulations. I know the political process. Let me play here, and for me to grow, let me diversify into as many businesses unrelated as possible. That's the strategy typically business groups have created. So we have a Birla group and a Tata group and all kinds of groups which basically have so many diversified businesses. It says now in this new world, what we'll have to do is to take a regional mindset. Malaysia in the ecosystem of Asia as a region, for example. And also maybe think about a few focused businesses. But then go multinational or at least international, not just Malaysia, which is a C. Why is this necessary? Again, there are four factors. One is global competition is going to be here. If global competitors come to Malaysia in automobile industry, component industry, even in palm oil type industry or infrastructure, we need to go there to understand how they do business. So for example, when Electrolux bought out the third largest appliance company in America, usually when the economy is restructuring, there's a fight for market share between number one and number two company. Economy is not growing, restructuring, and number 3, 4, 5 collapse. So we had a private equity guys who bought them out in the 80s, and they sold it to Electrolux because private equity guys come for a short time, 5 years, 3 years, and then they aggregate and sell the assets. Well, interestingly, when Electrolux came to America, I was working for Whirlpool Corporation, excellent company, and I told the chairman, we have no choice but to go to Europe. The unfair advantage Electrolux can have in Europe can subsidize losses in America. So we bought out Philips. Philips wanted to exit the appliance business, and Whirlpool became like number 1 or number 2 in Europe now. I told Mr. Chairman, Jack Sparks was his name, this is the short game. Ultimately, volumes for appliances will be in emerging markets, so let's enter India, which we did, eventually China. That's where the volumes will be for washing machines, for dryers, for refrigerators, etc. And that's very interesting. That is the survival game for Whirlpool now. Unless you learn how to market in those markets, they will be able to compete with you in your domestic market. That's the main point. Economic reforms are going to happen in Malaysia. In fact, all nations are saying that government-owned and owned and operating enterprises is not the future. Either you have a public-private partnership or actually just privatize as quickly as possible. And there are so many assets that government owns in most nations that I think those economic reforms will create opportunities for Malaysian corporations, not just domestically but internationally, and at the same time can provide attractive entry for competition. There are resource advantages we already talked about, but I do want to make point around there that I think one of the key things that every government is learning is that rather than governments being decision makers, they're taking the role of how do I enable. And if you want to go abroad, the government is the biggest enabler because one government has a relationship with other government, diplomatic, military, however it is, and therefore it's very easy to talk about opening the doors, if nothing else, for the companies from, let's say, Malaysia in this case. There is a robust regional growth, no question. China and India will continue growing at the pace that they have shown, at least in the short run for the next 10 years. I don't see slowing down. Vietnam is, I like Vietnam actually. Out of nowhere, again, ex-communist country becoming capitalist. I could not believe when I found out Vietnam, which is a small country relative to India, now is the largest cashew nut producer and exporter in the world. India had the right advantage. But India still does agriculture same way as thousands of years ago. They have not modernized their agriculture sector. You contrast that with America. Till last year, America was the largest cotton exporter in the world. Nobody could compete with America in cotton, which is an agriculture sector. They abandoned that after the Civil War in 1865 to go industrial, but they had now mechanized and automated cotton to a level which is very key. Only last year, India equalized cotton because of the BT cotton, the genetically modified cotton. So productivity is very high. So we have to increase your productivity, I think, is another one. So that's really what I'm talking about. There is a regional growth. So what can Malaysian company do to be globally competitive? First thing is, if you are into too many businesses, make up your mind what businesses you want to focus and go regional. You cannot fight 90 fronts of competition in a regional competitive arena. You got to pick and choose your battles. That's clearly first recommendation. Improve productivity through automation. This is always in conflict with government. Government believes you got to employ more people. But I tell you, you cannot survive in a globalizing economy without using automation and making that worker more valuable in wages in the process, because now he's using his brain, not just his hands, and actually needs more technical vocational education. You have to invest in that person. And therefore the person may command higher wages, but the output is so much. So in India, we may have lower wages, let's say in IT industry, but the productivity of Indian IT professionals may not be as great as the American IT professionals. Why? Because they have a huge technology and automation, even in IT industry. That's very important. This is where China, I think, learned, because Chinese manufacturing is not Chinese, as you know. It is foreign companies all coming at once, importing raw materials and doing the last stage value add, but they had a whole process in place, factories in place, and Chinese learned that automation is very key despite billion people. So we have these conflicting signals. More people I have, the less automated it should be. The best place to automate and get productivity out is agriculture. One American farmer today produces enough food for 100 additional farmers. Highest in the world, because it's all mechanized. Interesting. So that's the key point. That comes in. Have a banker in your pocket. That means that you cannot think of expanding regionally without having an investment banker who is going to carry the journey for you. J.P. Morgan, who was a very famous banker, and I've studied his biography quite a lot, actually created AT&T, as we know, created today's steel industry in America, as we know. He created a whole industries as the banker who said, okay, if you want to do that thing, I can support you. In India right now, as you see Indian multinationals going abroad, it is estimated $50 billion of private equity money is backing them up. Most of that is foreign money coming to India for them to buy foreign assets. You got to have a banker in your pocket for a long haul. So you can't shop around from transaction to transaction. You got to have a deep relationship with one bank, whether it's a sovereign bank, which is a bank of the nation essentially, or a private equity bank or private equity essentially, or a typical investment banking, whatever it is. So invest in innovation and design, which is the next point, point number 4. I am very passionate about design. And my view is that, again, like entrepreneurship, the best designers are ordinary people. You don't have to go to school to be a great designer. It's just something you visualize. Now, in some technical products, such as automobile, and technical products such as aircraft manufacturing, you may have to have education. But in general, so I'm very fond of design as a very key emphasis in a nation or in a company for that matter. In automobile, the chief design officer now is more important position than a chief engineering officer, for example. Transform human capital, we already talked about that one. How do we make ordinary people extraordinary? This is where I have a slight difference than my counterpart colleagues. I believe it is not the role of the government to invest in human capital. It is the role of the enterprises. They are your resource. People are your resource. Capital is your resource. How much we nurture capital, how much smart we are as the owners of companies, or our chief accountant or a chief financial officer, we know how to get access, and we know how to get the access at a good cost and all this stuff. Same family head does not have the same motivation about another capital called human capital and making that world class. So my view is that this obligation falls less on national leaders, political leaders, and more on corporate leaders. If corporate leaders understand it is in their self-interest to invest in human capital, you will get enormous uplifting of the human capital much faster than by any policy. Government can enable you, that's fine, but my view is that I think it's, and by the way, I find fascinating, if you have the presence of a strong union in a company or in an industry, it's the shame of management. Bad managers create unions, employees never create unions. Conclusive evidence, I can show it by data. It's the bad behavior by managers that creates union movement. Interesting. Totally different radical view. And I have a couple of books, etc. in this area. Earn quality reputation. And by the way, this is where I must tell you that a country that has done a great job and we can role model is Turkey. Turkey has world-class domestic companies. Good brand domestically, but globally nobody knows. There is no awareness. So they have taken a whole bureau, identify through very comparative proposal writing which companies have a global market potential, global meaning regional, mostly in this case, the European market, European Union as well as Russia in their case particular. And I have gone there. It's absolutely exciting to see, and they simply don't brand the product for globalization, change the name, packaging, but actually, in fact, they insist that the management, they are medium-sized companies, the management has to go through formal management curriculum at 2 private universities. One of them I know is Koch University. These guys are very good in what they do in textiles, in automotive sector, very well in jewelry, which I saw that, for example, in confectionery, sweets, all the stuff they make. There's a market abroad, but they never thought about it. So how do you encourage and motivate that? So I think earned quality reputation is very key. Without quality reputation, if you go abroad, you just won't make it. Even domestically, eventually you can't make it because poor quality means you will have to primarily offer at low prices by and large. Create globally admired brands. My view is that this ought to be our national passion. That the world says, my God, in Malaysia that brand is so good. I would not study that brand. India out of nowhere with such poor infrastructure, with I would say incredibly poor airports, here comes a company called Jet Airways and becomes a world-class airline. So is Kingfisher. Isn't that interesting? People who come there admire and simply say, my God, how do you do this stuff? It's all operational excellence. It's all managing large number of people. IT industry did the same thing. When I used to travel in the 60s all over the world, people would look upon me as a country of India origin, even though I'm an American, as a country of roaming cows and snake charmers. I still remember a large-scale project on machine tool industry I did, and all these guys are laughing at me, very large enterprises. You meet senior officers, they say, India in machine tools, you must be joking. Today when I go to Berlin or any place in Europe, the person who takes my luggage upstairs to my room, smiling now and says, are you a software engineer? Interesting, right? See, the images of the country has changed by performance of what they do. If you can never manufacture a brand, nor can you buy it in the marketplace, you gotta earn it. And that's where it comes out to be. How do we have a mission above and beyond making money to say, can I create a brand? And by the way, this is so common passion now in Africa, I sense it. So common passion now in other emerging economies. And we are beyond emerging economies, so I think we can do it even more. Participate in economic reforms. I think this current plan, if it is executed, creates more opportunities for private enterprise than you have imagined. It's like 1991 in India, where out of sheer necessity, government simply said, we cannot do the social things for people and economic things for people. So they began to say, all right, let private enterprise come in, like in telephone industry, for example, or in power, etc., which used to be government enterprises, and the rest is history in India in the process. I think same thing, my view is that I think industry should participate more actively into the changing, including private-public partnership, however you do it. I think that's very key. I don't think governments by themselves can do it. I don't think industry by themselves can do it, but some sort of a cooperation between industry and government can create an enormous uplift in the society. And make strategic acquisitions. My view is that I think if Malaysian companies want to go regional, it is not just export, and I know we are at the trade building here and the trade mission, but I think it has to be export and acquisitions, organic growth and inorganic growth. Acquisitions are a very strategic component of regional expansion by and large. So I will stop here. So divest non-core businesses. Here is what Grupo Mexico did. It is the largest company in flour. They just bought out the largest company in America who makes wheat flour, for example. Interestingly. Aditya Birla Group just bought a large American company in carbon black and is #1 in the world now. That was unthinkable. Usually it will be the American company buying out an Indian company, just the reverse. Huawei Technology, we already talked about that one. Improve productivity through automation. Here are some examples. In telecommunications, automation is a given. There's no way you can do it any other way. It's a very technology-intensive industry by and large. Have a banker in your pocket. I want to take a couple of slides around here to show you. There is an example. If not, I'll go back to the first one and just add some more. In my institute, we have a program of emerging multinationals from emerging economies. We have done 10 countries so far. Thailand, we just did it. Malaysia is on the deck, I know, pretty much. We have done Egypt, Turkey, Mexico. Then we have done, of course, the BRIC countries. It's absolutely incredible. South Africa, we did it. So here are two companies that have bought out two largest companies in America. InBev, INBEV, which is Belgian-based, but I would say a Brazilian company. They bought out Anheuser-Busch, the largest beer-making company, and Anheuser-Busch had no idea who InBev is. SAB, South African Brewing, bought out the second largest beer company in America, Miller Brewing Company. There's a whole potential out there, which I think is very key. I clearly see more emerging multinationals dominating on a global basis, including in advanced countries, than I could ever imagine at one time. So I think that's what we have to do. So there's a whole area around here, and I think the rest of the points we have already made it without looking at the slides. So yes, make strategic acquisitions, which is Bharti Airtel will become one of the top 3 in the wireless technology. China Mobile won't be able to do it, because China Mobile is very domestic, it's expanding globally, but very slowly in the process. So it's fascinating. I think it's very doable. If Indian companies can do it, Malaysian companies can do it even better, is my view, personally. There's a word called, in point number 9, global rule of 3. At one time, I was tempted to even put a slide. All industries, as they get organized, ultimately become 2 types of companies. One, those are specialty. In retailing, you will see specialty retailing and mass merchandisers, right? The way you make money is very different. The specialty guys will make money by having margin control. They do something unique, different. It's like Foot Locker.